July 18th, 2012. It's a sweltering Wednesday afternoon in Phoenix, Arizona, one of the fastest growing metros in America.
Phoenix is the anchor city of a sprawling, multi-city metropolitan area known as Valley of the Sun.
This time of the year, it's hot, triple digits. We're looking at 110s, 115s.
And on this 112-degree Arizona afternoon, things are about to get even hotter.
Phoenix police get a call from a very frantic man. He says that his apartment is on fire.
911, what is your emergency?
My apartment's on fire, my girlfriend's inside.
The caller is 21-year-old Dwandarius Robinson.
He reports that his girlfriend, Shaniqua Hall, may be inside of the building.
She was there when I left.
Do you think she's still inside?
I don't know.
He's frantic. He doesn't know what's going on.
I tried to get in, but I couldn't.
With all the smoke, he didn't want to risk taking his daughter in there.
Please, send someone, hurry up.
And if Shaniqua is trapped inside, she isn't the only one.
She's 9 months pregnant.
My baby, Shaniqua.
At only 21, Shaniqua Hall had a bright future ahead of her.
She was a vibrant young woman, a positive person.
She was really a fun-loving, outgoing girl who really loved to joke around.
She was a light in everyone's life.
And the light of her life was her boyfriend, Dwandarius.
Can I get an application?
Dwandarius Robinson, also known as Darius to family and friends, met Shaniqua Hall while they were in high school.
Fill out your first name.
She actually came to his job applying for a position and he helped her.
Thanks. I really hope I get the job.
Yeah, me too.
They just kind of hit it off from the beginning.
Shaniqua did get the job, and soon she and Darius grew closer.
She had the night shift. He would walk her home every night.
And from there, they just start falling in love.
You want to come in? Meet my mom?
Yeah, I love that.
Shaniqua came from a very loving family. They were very present, they were very supportive.
It was a life Darius had never known.
Dwandarius did not come from a stable home.
Look who's coming in the door.
His mother was in prison.
Well, hi, Darius. How are you?
His father wasn't in the picture, and he'd spent most of his childhood being passed around between relatives.
Thinking about what that means for a young child, he might have felt that he wasn't loved or didn't have someone that really cared.
But once he met Shaniqua, all that changed.
Shaniqua's family kind of brought him in.
Shaniqua's mom really started to take to Dwandarius.
If he was walking her home at night after they got off late, her mother cared enough to say, hey, it's okay to stay at our house. We want to keep you safe as well.
Those occasional overnight stays eventually became permanent.
Shaniqua's mom allowed him to move in the house with them.
He probably really appreciated it, honestly, to have people that would look out for him.
Darius was finally able to find a family.
And with support from Shaniqua's family, Darius thrived.
He was working hard, he was going to school, and he was going to church every week.
However, there were some complications.
Hey, Ma.
While he was living there, Shaniqua became pregnant.
Here's something to show you.
Oh, wow.
Instead of making them feel bad for their mistakes, Shaniqua's mom really supported them.
We're going to get through this together.
She allowed them to stay there until they graduated high school.
In 2009, the happy couple had a beautiful baby girl.
These two parents are so excited. They get an apartment of their own. Shaniqua got a job at a call center. Darius is working as a security guard at a local college. This is a young couple, fresh out of high school, really trying to make it work.
And then, at the end of 2011, the young couple got more exciting news.
They were expecting their second child.
There was a lot of excitement around just preparing for a new baby.
The family moved into a new, bigger apartment.
And they were also making big plans for the future.
Shaniqua and Darius started talking about getting married.
It's not often times that people this young can actually come together and build a life, but they seem to have done it.
Only now, it looks like their bright future may be in jeopardy.
911 received a frantic call stating that there was a fire in the apartment.
I tried to get in, but I couldn't. Please, send someone, hurry up!
He's afraid that his girlfriend, Shaniqua, is stuck inside that burning apartment.
She's in here, she's in here!
When first responders arrive on the scene, Darius meets them in the parking lot.
He led the firefighters into the apartment.
She's in here, she's in here!
The last he knew, Shaniqua was in the apartment.
Firefighters rush inside and quickly assess the situation.
They start looking for any signs of anyone that may still be alive and immediately see white smoke in the hallway.
The bulk of the smoke seems to be coming from the bedroom.
When he reaches the bedroom door, he opens it and he's met with thick smoke.
The area around the bed was in flames.
They immediately put out the fire with a portable fire extinguisher.
Once the blaze is out, the firefighters find Shaniqua.
They found Shaniqua on the floor between the bed and the wall.
She was badly burned.
It is too late to save her.
And it doesn't look like her death is an accident.
She had a rag stuffed in her mouth.
She was bound by duct tape.
We're gonna have one victim inside.
Shaniqua Hall and Darius Robinson couldn't wait to welcome their new addition to the world.
They were both excited about the birth of this second child.
In preparation, they'd moved into a new, bigger apartment.
Everything was looking up for them.
But now, after Darius called 911 and reported a fire at their apartment, firefighters have found Shaniqua's badly burned body in the couple's bedroom. And her death appears to be no accident.
Her hands were bound with duct tape.
There's a rag in her mouth.
Once the fire is out, first responders call in homicide
We
detectives.
have one victim inside.
It looks like the fire was set to hide a crime.
Was it a robbery or home invasion?
When homicide detectives arrive on the scene, they quickly rule out the robbery angle.
There doesn't seem to be any forced entry, and it doesn't look like anything was disturbed.
There was no ransacking, no electronics gone, no valuables gone.
In fact, the detectives suspect that Shaniqua's killer may have left something behind.
They found 2 rolls of duct tape on the kitchen counter.
One that's almost completely finished and one that has not been used.
The used roll is a match for the tape used to bind Shaniqua.
They also found a mostly empty bottle of lighter fluid.
It definitely looks like somebody came in to intentionally torture and kill Shaniqua.
It will take an autopsy to determine if she was dead before the blaze began, but detectives have little doubt she was doused with the accelerant and set on fire.
In this instance, the fire was localized to the bed and the floor where the deceased person was found. That, in and of itself, is suspicious.
The fire had largely sputtered out before the apartment was fully engulfed.
Something like lighter fluid, it doesn't burn for very long. So it's not going to do the type of damage that the person that set the fire was intending.
Detectives have Darius make arrangements for his daughter, then transport him to the station for a formal statement.
Police take Darius while detectives stay and canvass the area.
They start by speaking to the neighbors who've gathered outside.
Quite a few neighbors said that they heard the smoke alarms going off.
I heard that alarm going off. I didn't know it was a fire alarm.
They didn't see any smoke or any fire.
And no one saw anything suspicious.
During that whole time, I didn't see one person leave or enter.
The next thing anyone knew, police and firefighters were there, and Darius was outside with his daughter.
He was really upset. I was watching through the window, just kind of trying to figure out what's going on.
The neighbors were mostly in shock that Shaniqua was dead.
Did she mention any trouble between the two of them or anything like that?
Darius and Shaniqua's neighbors all say they seemed like a happy couple.
Friendly people, like when we saw them, we'd say hi.
Thank you.
When the canvass is complete, detectives head back to the precinct to take Darius's statement.
Darius didn't have any problem cooperating.
He still seemed pretty shaken by what happened.
Start with this morning and bring me up to now.
So about I lived at right before 4.
He says he went to work.
Got off work at 1 o'clock. I left like 3 minutes after this.
Okay, and then what do you do?
I went across the street to the store.
He said he had picked up a few groceries, and then he went back to the apartment.
And he saw Shaniqua, and they talked a little bit.
Then, to give Shaniqua a little alone time, he had taken their daughter out to lunch.
But their father-daughter moment was about to take a disastrous turn.
When he returned, he said he saw the smoke and he heard the fire alarms.
Shaniqua!
Did you ever make it up into the apartment?
I had my daughter in my hand. I wasn't going to do that.
So that's when he made the frantic 911 call.
911, what is your emergency?
My apartment's on fire. My girlfriend's inside.
Darius's story fits with what the detectives know, but there are parts of it that give them pause.
Shaniqua was 9 months pregnant with their child, and he didn't go in and try to save them?
I didn't know whether or not she was still in there.
She was there when you left.
Was there some secret about the couple's relationship the neighbors hadn't seen?
What would you describe your relationship with your girlfriend like?
We have our days where we have verbal disagreements and go back and forth with each other, but not the typical normal.
And when the detectives ask if anyone else might want to hurt Shaniqua, he says no.
There's no reason why anybody would set fire to your apartment.
No.
Then, at the conclusion of the interview, the detectives ask one last thing of Darius.
We're gonna forensically examine your clothing for signs of accelerant.
It's standard procedure for these kinds of investigations.
Finished with Darius, the detectives turn to Shaniqua's mother, who's been waiting anxiously for answers.
Thank you for coming in. I'm sorry for your loss.
Her mom and several other family members showed up to the crime scene as soon as they got word.
They were advised by officers still on the scene to go on and head down to the station and speak with detectives.
Her mom starts by filling detectives in on her daughter's relationship with Darius.
She talked about how they've been together since they were teenagers, how she took him in under her roof.
It's been around for a long time.
This is someone that she said was like family.
Much like the neighbors, she said she never saw any trouble in the relationship.
Was he ever physical with her? No. Was she physical with him? No.
However, she also says that their relationship wasn't perfect.
I know that he's a cheater.
He's a cheater?
He's a cheater.
And she says there's proof.
Darius has a baby with another woman.
Detectives investigating the murder of Shaniqua Hall have just learned that her boyfriend Darius Robinson has been unfaithful.
Shaniqua's mother told the investigators that Darius had gotten someone else pregnant.
Her name is Stephanie Cameron.
According to Shaniqua's mom, Darius got Stephanie pregnant while he was dating Shaniqua.
The baby's about a year and a half now.
She also said there's no doubt that Darius is the father of her child.
We've seen a picture of the baby.
She said the little boy looked just like Darius.
Shaniqua's mother says that her daughter had been upset when she found out about Stephanie's pregnancy. But she didn't break things off with Darius.
Relationship infidelity is not always a deal breaker.
Despite the fact that he had gotten another woman pregnant, Shaniqua decided to forgive him.
That wasn't the only unusual thing Shaniqua did.
Shaniqua had actually contacted Stephanie.
She goes to her and says, you know, I want to let you know our children can be siblings. They are siblings, and we should get to know each other.
Despite the circumstances, the two women had done just that.
They started talking and communicating back and forth.
We have this very interesting dynamic of two women finding out that they have children by the same man, and they actually build a relationship.
How mature, how selfless, too, to think about her child and having an expanded family, a blended family.
However, according to Shaniqua's mother, the kids weren't all the two women talked about.
She said that Shaniqua and Stephanie had also talked a lot about Darius.
They became like friends. Teenage girls comparing notes.
They would cross-reference stories that he told each of them.
According to Shaniqua's mom, Darius spent several months trying to juggle both relationships.
Darius was telling one he was going to stay with them, and he was telling the other one the same thing.
Until he found out that his two girlfriends were talking behind his back.
And he kind of felt betrayed that they have this relationship that they've been building behind his back.
When he found out about that they were communicating, he was mad, he yelled. You know, why you in my business? It's none of your business what I do.
None of my business? No. You're the one who's cheating. You know what?
According to Shaniqua's mother, it was only then that her daughter decided she'd had enough.
She put him out.
She put him out.
She was like, get out of my house.
When he left, Darius had gone to stay with Stephanie, and Shaniqua had tried to move on.
She said, you know, Mommy, I'm done. I'm gonna move on with my life. Well, baby, that's what you need to do. You need to move on.
Unfortunately, Shaniqua had not followed her mother's advice.
A couple months later, I find out he's back.
And he was back with Shaniqua because Stephanie had put him out.
For what reason?
Because he was still communicating with Shaniqua.
Shaniqua's mother says she was initially skeptical about the reconciliation.
Over time, she said she realized that Darius and her daughter were committed to working things out.
Every weekend, I cook Sunday dinners.
Right.
Him, Darius.
And how are those situated?
They were fine. Everybody's laughing and talking.
And with the new baby on the way, their commitment had only grown.
They were talking about marriage.
She told you.
Was it possible Stephanie found out about the marriage plans?
It is a possibility that she could have sought revenge.
Detective decided they need to have a chat with this other woman.
And their suspicions of Stephanie only deepen after the detectives talked to Shaniqua's aunt.
The detectives reached out to her aunt because she was the last person who spoke to Shaniqua other than Darius.
My understanding is you had a phone conversation with Shaniqua.
Yes, she called me at 12:34.
The last time that Shaniqua spoke with her aunt was just hours before she died.
We discussed about the baby.
She had talked to her almost every day about how excited she was about the pregnancy.
Do you have any knowledge of DeJuan Darius's, I guess, looking forward to this child, or was there any type of regrets or negativity surrounding it?
Well, she did state to me that he had seemed happy.
However, she also says there was one thing that still worried Shaniqua.
She said that the girlfriend that he had, she felt kind of off about that.
According to Shaniqua, Darius had been keeping Stephanie in the dark.
She didn't think that he had even told her that she was pregnant and having another baby.
Detectives suspect there may have been bad blood between Shaniqua Hall and Stephanie Cameron over the father of their children, Darius Robinson.
Darius and Shaniqua reconciled, and they were living together once again.
Shaniqua was also 9 months pregnant with her and Darius's second child.
According to Shaniqua's aunt, Darius had never shared the news with Stephanie, who he also had a child with.
But now detectives wonder if Stephanie had found out.
Shaniqua was far enough along that there was no hiding it.
Could this have been the cause of the murder?
If Stephanie was already jealous that Darius was getting back with Shaniqua, maybe the news of them expecting a baby pushed her over the edge.
When the detectives bring Stephanie in for questioning, she appears more than willing to cooperate.
I heard about what happened to Shaniqua, but I just can't believe it.
She was super shocked that anybody would want to do anything like this to her.
I had nothing to do with that if that's what you're assuming.
But she's adamant that she's not involved.
Stephanie told the detectives there was no beef between them. There was no anger. In fact, they had become friends.
They both wanted to do the best that they could for their children.
They were really excited about raising the kids together as siblings.
Both women displayed a level of maturity, a level of kindness, a level of support and love and selflessness.
I didn't even know that Darius and her were together until after I was pregnant.
But she says she'd known Darius a lot longer.
She's known Darius since they were kids.
She says, however, their relationship was short-lived.
He had moved in a month before their child was born and then 5 months afterwards. She said she really had no more dealings with him at all.
You weren't jealous that he went back to Shaniqua?
Lord, no. If anything, I said she can have him.
She said she didn't really want Darius back. He lied about everything, and he was very manipulative.
Look, Darius was telling me one thing and then would turn around and tell Shaniqua another.
She talked about how they used to compare notes.
Stephanie says that Shaniqua had given her all the dirt about her relationship with Darius.
I'm just surprised she took him back, especially after how they fought.
According to Stephanie, Shaniqua said that she and Darius argued all the time.
It wasn't very violent, just a little pushing and shoving.
He ever put hands on you?
No, but there is something you should know.
Stephanie lets detectives know that Shaniqua and Darius were engaged in a child support battle.
Stephanie said she found out about the child support dispute because some of the court papers got sent to her at her house.
He owed about $10,000 in back payments.
To detectives, it sounded like Stephanie was suggesting that Darius might have a motive to get rid of Shaniqua.
Having the stress of child support, having money issues, it could possibly be domestic violence.
Or is Stephanie just trying to throw the detectives off her trail?
Where were you Wednesday afternoon?
I was in California.
Okay.
And when investigators look into Stephanie's alibi, it checks out.
They were able to confirm it from multiple witnesses.
What Stephanie told them about the child support also tracks.
Detectives pulled the court records and determined that Darius was supposed to be paying child support to Shaniqua for their first daughter.
Shaniqua had filed for child support when she kicked Darius out.
Was that really a motive for murder?
Shaniqua and Darius were thinking about getting married.
Now, if that happened, wouldn't the child support case go away?
The detectives are still digging into the child support issue when they get an urgent call from Shaniqua's sister.
Homicide.
Shaniqua's sister informs them that things weren't as rosy as everyone saw.
There's something you need to know about Shaniqua and Darius.
She said that Shaniqua suspected Darius was cheating on her again.
She didn't tell Mama, since Mama didn't want her to get back with him to begin with.
He was receiving text messages, he was getting phone calls at all hours of the night.
And according to her sister, Shaniqua had recently gotten proof that Darius was still stepping out.
A week before the murder, Darius got a ticket from a red light camera.
The car was registered in Shaniqua's name, therefore the ticket went to Shaniqua.
The photo from the traffic camera came with the ticket.
In it, you could see Darius behind the wheel.
And he wasn't alone.
There was another woman in the car. It was not Shaniqua.
It wasn't Stephanie either.
He got himself another girl.
Shaniqua was furious.
She told her sister, she's done, it's over, this was the last straw.
There was no way she was gonna marry him.
Detectives investigating Shaniqua Hall's murder have just learned that she was having second thoughts about marrying her boyfriend, Darius Robinson.
Shaniqua's sister had let detectives know that Shaniqua had found out that Darius was a serial cheater.
Shaniqua was thinking he was not ready for the type of commitment that she needed.
Could the impending breakup be a factor in Shaniqua's murder?
Darius already owed her child support for the one baby. If they separated, he'd be on the hook for the second one too.
Now suspicious of Darius, detectives go back over his story.
They were particularly interested in what happened in the hours leading up to the 911 call.
He said that after work, he stopped by the grocery store to get a few things. And then he went home to take his baby girl to lunch.
To check up on Darius's story, detectives pay a visit to the supermarket Darius supposedly stopped into on his way home from work.
When the detectives reviewed the store's surveillance video from that day, it confirmed Darius's story.
The surveillance video clearly shows Darius at the grocery store.
However, that's not all the footage reveals.
Among the items that Darius purchased at the grocery store were 2 rolls of duct tape.
He also purchased lighter fluid.
Just so happened, he purchased it a few hours before the fire took place.
With video evidence that appears to connect Darius to both the murder and the arson, the detectives bring him in for another round of questioning.
Investigators wanted to get some more information about what really happened in that apartment that day.
They start by asking Darius about the child support he owed Shaniqua.
From Darius's reaction, it was clear that the child support was a source of frustration.
But you live with her mother.
I know.
So why do you pay child support?
We lived together forever.
However, Darius said that the child support wasn't going to be an issue once they got married.
We got all that settled.
Okay.
Although, based on what Shaniqua's sister told them, the detectives knew that was not true.
When the detectives confront him about the lighter fluid and the duct tape, Darius doesn't deny that it's him in the store surveillance video.
He admits to having purchased them.
However, he also says he can explain.
The tape is for this little project I was going to work on. We got the soda box. I was going to make something out of it.
He said he wanted to make it a dispenser in the refrigerator.
Okay, to dispense soda cans type thing?
Yeah, we dropped it down. We just keep that until it empties.
Darius said that there was a totally innocent explanation for the lighter fluid too.
She wanted to do like a family day and make burgers.
But despite Darius's attempts to explain away the tape and the lighter fluid, the detectives aren't buying it.
Don't you think that it's just outrageously coincidental that she's bound up with the duct tape that you bought?
Duct tape my freaking girlfriend.
He also denied setting her on fire.
I wasn't there.
Well, you were, kinda. You were closer to it than I was.
I was outside. I don't know what happened inside.
Darius kept denying it, saying that it was just a coincidence. But the detectives, they don't believe in coincidences.
There's a lot more to this story than what you're telling me.
How do you know?
Because I know what happened in that apartment. I know that your girlfriend's dead in there. I know that there was duct tape used in her death. And I know that she was set on fire. And you were at Albertsons buying duct tape and lighter fluid, and suddenly this happened.
Proof that I did that to her.
Well, it certainly is a strong indication that you did.
After laying out the evidence against him, the detectives give Darius one last chance to come clean.
I want you to think real hard about how you want to be portrayed in this. If you have anything to do with this at all, if this was you that did this, then you need to get out in front of this and be a good guy. Good people do things sometimes on the spur of the moment that they regret later. If you stay on the road of, I don't know what you're talking about, detective, and then later on it turns out to be you appear to be a cold-blooded killer. On the other hand, if this is something that got out of control, and you're genuinely sorry for it, this is the time to tell me that that's the case.
I wasn't there.
You were not there, you didn't have anything to do with this. I don't believe you.
At the end of the interview, the detectives place Darius under arrest.
You're not going home tonight.
I'm not going home.
Negative. Under no circumstances are you going home. You're going to be booked into jail on 2 counts of first-degree murder.
They not only charged him with Shaniqua's murder, but for the unborn babies as well.
And the evidence against Darius gets even stronger when the detectives get the test results back from the crime lab.
The crime lab was able to determine that there was an accelerant that was used.
According to the lab, the accelerant was some form of petroleum distillate.
Petroleum distillate is found in items such as charcoal, lighter fluid, paint thinner, and mineral spirits.
And the crime lab also found traces of it somewhere else.
Darius had accelerant on the clothes that he was wearing the day of Shaniqua's murder.
Phoenix detectives have arrested 21-year-old Darius Robinson for the murder of his girlfriend Shaniqua Hall and the couple's unborn child.
They had store surveillance footage of him buying the tape used to tie up Shaniqua and the lighter fluid to start the fire.
They also found accelerant on his clothes.
And when the detectives received the results of Shaniqua's autopsy, it's clear that she'd met a violent end.
The medical examiner was not able to conclusively determine a cause of death. However, the report indicated that there were signs of blunt force trauma, strangulation, and burn damage to the body.
Shaniqua's mother is still struggling to make sense of the heinous crime when the detectives follow up with her the day after Darius's arrest.
There was never a sign of anything, no physical violence, no domestic violence.
We have to think about what Shaniqua's mother is feeling. She lost her daughter, but she also lost someone that was like a son to her.
Mom, we called, Mom, thank you for being a mom, thank you for being, and that's all I was ever. Yeah.
She was trying so hard to be loving and extending that love and grace and support, only for it to end with tragedy.
How could you do this to the family? That, basically for 5 years was there for you. And then it's like, what?
It just really hurts. She trusted this man.
I'm not going to insult you and say that I know what you're going through because I don't, but what I can say is that we're here to, do our best to make sure that, your family gets justice.
Thank you. Thank you.
When Darius goes on trial for murder, the prosecutors portray him as a man who felt trapped.
He was already paying child support for the one kid, and now with Shaniqua 9 months pregnant and refusing to marry him, he was going to be on the hook for the second child as well.
He was probably very focused on, I need to get out, I need to escape. She is the reason why I'm having these problems, the reason why I'm unhappy, and I just need her to be gone. And sadly and tragically, he chose violence to get out of this situation.
According to the prosecutors, he not only chose violence, he planned it.
He knew exactly what he was going to do that day. He went into the store purposely to buy the duct tape, to buy lighter fluid.
Then he went home and put his plan into motion.
When he arrived at the apartment, he attacked her.
He stuffed her mouth with this rag
and bound her with duct tape.
Then he killed her.
He strangled her while her 2-year-old daughter was still in the home.
Possibly she was out in the living room watching cartoons. Possibly she heard what was going on.
All the prosecutors know for sure is that Darius doused the little girl's mother with lighter fluid and set her aflame.
Others in an apartment complex who could die and their children. He's not focused on that. He doesn't care about that. He only cares about escaping this situation.
But in his hurry to escape, Darius made a mistake.
As he left the bedroom where Shaniqua lay dead, he closed the door behind him.
Oxygen is necessary for a fire to burn hot and to burn long.
Closing the door, cut off the oxygen to the fire so the fire could no longer breathe.
Which was why there was only white smoke in the hallway and not a raging inferno.
Darius had to have been shocked when he returned to the apartment.
He fully expected to get back to the apartment in flames.
But with Shaniqua already dead inside, there was no turning back.
911, what is your emergency?
My apartment's on fire, my girlfriend's inside.
When it's the defense's turn, they stick to Darius's story.
He simply came home and found the apartment on fire.
He had nothing to do with it.
They claimed the fact that he bought the lighter fluid and tape a little over an hour before is nothing but a coincidence.
But the jury doesn't believe in coincidences any more than the detectives did.
The jury finds Darius Robinson guilty on 2 counts of murder.
Darius Robinson was sentenced to death in the murder of Shaniqua Hall and her unborn baby.
Darius getting the death sentence may feel like justice initially, but the reality is that there's never enough justice when someone you love is taken in such a terrible, violent way.
This is something that should have never happened.
There were so many more options that Darius could have taken. He could have allowed that child to be born.
Instead, he's in prison. And his surviving daughter is left to suffer the consequences of his selfish action.
I think about this young girl growing up and then understanding one day how her mother died and why her mother died. And I hope that she will know that even though she has difficult days ahead as she grows without a mother, that she will always be loved and that her mother is still with her and loving her.
The winter wind moved through Englewood like a warning no one could quite understand. Long after midnight, the streets of Chicago's South Side seemed almost abandoned. The glow from distant streetlights reflected off patches of dirty snow gathered along cracked sidewalks. Empty lots stretched between aging buildings. Broken windows stared out into the darkness like hollow eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into silence. For most people, it was just another cold night in one of the city's toughest neighborhoods. For someone else, it was hunting season. He walked those streets unnoticed. He did not wear a mask. He did not hide in the shadows. He was not some mysterious figure lurking behind bushes or waiting beneath bridges. People knew him. Some greeted him. Some trusted him. And that was exactly what made him so dangerous. For years, women disappeared into abandoned houses, vacant lots, and forgotten corners of Englewood. Some were found within hours. Others remained missing until their bodies surfaced later. Their deaths shared disturbing similarities, but in a neighborhood overwhelmed by violence, addiction, poverty, and fear, those similarities were easy to miss. At first, they seemed like isolated tragedies. Then they became a pattern. Then they became a nightmare. By the time authorities finally understood what was happening, 11 women would be dead. 11 lives. 11 families shattered. 11 stories abruptly ended. And at the center of it all stood a man named Andre Crawford. A man who would eventually become known as one of the most horrifying serial killers in Chicago history. What made Crawford terrifying was not simply the number of victims. It was what happened after the murders. Investigators would later discover details so disturbing that even seasoned detectives struggled to discuss them without visible discomfort. The killings were only part of the horror. Crawford's crimes extended beyond death itself, crossing boundaries that many people could barely comprehend. The women he targeted often lived on society's margins. Some struggled with addiction. Some survived through prostitution. Many were poor. Most had spent years navigating dangers that few outsiders could imagine. Yet they were daughters, mothers, sisters, friends, human beings. And for years, someone treated them as if their lives meant nothing. The most chilling part of the story was not how Crawford killed. It was how long he remained invisible. 6 years. 6 years during which bodies continued to appear. 6 years during which fear spread block by block. 6 years during which a killer moved freely through the same streets as his victims. And perhaps most shocking of all, there were moments when he appeared to be helping the community protect itself from the very monster everyone feared. Imagine receiving a flyer warning residents about a serial killer. Imagine learning years later that the man handing you that flyer was the killer himself. That is not fiction. That happened. But before we get to the investigation, before the arrests, before the courtroom and the confessions, we need to travel back to Chicago in the 1990s. Because this story is not only about a predator. It is also about a place. A place where desperation and neglect created conditions that allowed evil to hide in plain sight. A place where many victims felt invisible long before they became victims. A place called Englewood. To understand Andre Crawford, you must first understand the world that surrounded him. The Chicago skyline was only a few miles away, yet it might as well have existed in another universe. Tourists visited downtown skyscrapers. Businessmen filled glass towers. Crowds gathered around restaurants, theaters, and sporting events. Meanwhile, on the south side, entire blocks seemed forgotten. Factories had closed years earlier. Jobs disappeared. Families moved away when they could. Many who remained faced relentless economic hardship. Abandoned homes became common landmarks. Vacant lots multiplied. Drug markets flourished in places where opportunity had vanished. By the early 1990s, crack cocaine had left deep scars across countless communities. Addiction spread rapidly. Violence followed. Entire families found themselves trapped in cycles that felt impossible to escape. Englewood became one of the neighborhoods most affected. News reports often focused on crime statistics. Politicians discussed policy. Experts debated solutions. But statistics never captured what daily life actually felt like. The mother waiting for her child to come home. The grandmother peering through curtains after hearing gunshots. The young woman trying to survive one more night. Those realities rarely made headlines. And in that environment, vulnerable women faced dangers from every direction. Some struggled to find stable housing. Some fought addiction. Some exchanged sex for money, shelter, or drugs. Many were forced to make impossible choices. Every day became a negotiation with risk. Trust the wrong person. Get into the wrong car. Walk down the wrong street. The consequences could be devastating. Predators understood this. Andre Crawford understood it exceptionally well. He knew the neighborhood. He knew the people. He knew where police patrols were strongest and where they were weakest. Most importantly, he understood which victims might disappear without generating immediate public outrage. That knowledge became one of his most powerful weapons. Serial killers often rely on secrecy. Some rely on intelligence. Others rely on manipulation. Crawford relied on invisibility. Not because nobody saw him. Because nobody suspected him. At least not at first. Years later, detectives would reconstruct the timeline of his crimes and realize how frequently he moved through the community without attracting attention. Witnesses remembered seeing him. Victims knew him. Neighbors recognized him. Yet somehow, he remained hidden. It is one of the most unsettling truths in criminal history. Sometimes monsters do not stand apart from society. Sometimes they blend into it. And when they do, they can become extraordinarily difficult to stop. As the years passed, bodies accumulated. Women were found beaten, strangled, stabbed, discarded. The details varied, but a disturbing pattern slowly emerged. Many victims shared similar backgrounds. Many were discovered within the same geographic area. Many appeared connected by circumstances that investigators struggled to ignore. Still, solving the murders proved far more complicated than recognizing similarities. Chicago already faced significant violent crime during that era. Detectives handled enormous caseloads. Resources were limited. Witnesses were often reluctant to cooperate. Fear permeated the streets. Then another complication emerged. Authorities began investigating a different serial killer operating in the same region. His name was Hubert Geralds. Suddenly investigators faced an extraordinary challenge. Two predators. Overlapping timelines. Similar victim profiles. The possibility of multiple killers hunting within the same community. Confusion spread through the investigations. Some murders appeared connected. Others seemed uncertain. Evidence pointed in different directions. Families waited for answers that never came. Meanwhile, the real killer continued moving through Englewood. Watching. Waiting. Searching. One victim after another. One family after another. One funeral after another. And all the while, the clock kept ticking. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the case was how many warning signs existed before the full picture emerged. Women spoke about danger. Residents discussed rumors. People sensed something was wrong. But suspicion is not evidence. Fear is not proof. And until investigators could connect the pieces, the killings continued. The future survivors of this story did not know they were survivors yet. The future detectives did not know they were chasing a serial killer. The future jurors had never heard Andre Crawford's name. The future families had no idea their lives would soon be changed forever. Everything still lay ahead. The murders. The discoveries. The investigations. The mistakes. The breakthroughs. The confessions. The justice that would arrive only after years of suffering. But somewhere in the darkness of Englewood, a predator was already taking his first steps toward becoming one of Chicago's most infamous killers. The snow continued falling. The wind continued blowing. Street lights flickered above empty sidewalks. And another woman walked through the night, unaware that history was about to become much darker. Because this story does not begin with an arrest. It begins with a city looking the other way. It begins with victims whose voices were often ignored. It begins with fear spreading silently through forgotten streets. And it begins with a killer who believed he would never be caught. For 6 years, that belief seemed correct. Until one mistake. One witness. One piece of evidence. One crack in the mask. And when that mask finally shattered, Chicago would discover a truth more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The man they were searching for had been standing among them all along. By the early 1990s, there were parts of Chicago that tourists never saw. Postcards showed gleaming skyscrapers reflecting sunlight across Lake Michigan. Television broadcasts captured the energy of downtown streets, packed restaurants, famous sports teams, and architectural landmarks recognized around the world. To outsiders, Chicago appeared vibrant, powerful, and endlessly alive. But several miles south of that postcard image existed a very different reality. A reality measured not in tourist attractions, but in boarded windows. Not in prosperity, but in survival. Not in opportunity, but in endurance. This was Englewood. And before Andre Crawford became one of the most feared serial killers in the city's history, Englewood itself had already become a place fighting its own battle for survival. To understand how Crawford operated for so many years, it is necessary to understand the environment that surrounded him. Serial killers do not emerge from empty spaces. They exist within communities, within systems, and within circumstances that can either expose them or help conceal them. In Englewood, many of those circumstances worked in the killer's favor. The neighborhood had once been thriving. Decades earlier, families filled the streets. Businesses operated along busy commercial corridors. Children played on sidewalks beneath rows of well-kept homes. Like many American urban neighborhoods, Englewood experienced periods of growth and optimism. Then came economic decline. Manufacturing jobs disappeared. Businesses closed. Investment moved elsewhere. Families with resources often left in search of safer neighborhoods and better opportunities. What remained was a community increasingly burdened by unemployment, poverty, and neglect. By the time the 1990s arrived, entire blocks bore the scars of those changes. Vacant houses stood like monuments to better days. Some had collapsed roofs. Others were stripped of copper wiring, doors, and windows. Tall weeds grew through cracked pavement during summer months. During winter, snow drifted through shattered entryways and gathered inside abandoned living rooms. At night, many of these buildings became places where almost anything could happen. Drug transactions, violence, temporary shelter, or worse. For residents, danger was not an occasional event. It was part of daily life. People learned which streets to avoid after dark. They learned how to recognize trouble before it arrived. They learned not to stare too long at strangers. They learned to mind their own business. Because in neighborhoods where violence is common, survival often depends on knowing when not to ask questions. The crack cocaine epidemic had intensified many of these struggles. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, addiction spread through countless communities across America, and Englewood was among those deeply affected. The drug altered lives with brutal efficiency. Families fractured. Savings disappeared. Children grew up surrounded by instability. Many individuals found themselves trapped in cycles they could not escape. For some women, addiction became a daily battle. Every morning began with the same urgent need. Every day revolved around finding money, finding shelter, finding safety, finding another way to survive. Some turned to sex work. Others depended on acquaintances who supplied drugs in exchange for favors. Many lived in situations that exposed them to tremendous danger. These women often moved through spaces that society preferred not to see. And because they were frequently ignored, they became vulnerable in ways that predators understood. Andre Crawford understood. He understood who might trust him. He understood who might agree to accompany him. Most importantly, he understood whose disappearance might not immediately trigger a citywide search. That realization would eventually become one of the most devastating elements of the entire case. But years before his name became known, Englewood residents were already living with fear. Gunshots occasionally echoed through the night. Police sirens became part of the background soundtrack of everyday life. Mothers waited anxiously for children to return home. Grandparents locked doors before sunset. Many residents genuinely cared for their neighborhood, but they were fighting forces larger than themselves. Economic hardship, drug addiction, violence, neglect. And as these pressures accumulated, another danger quietly emerged. At first, nobody recognized it. Because the first victim did not appear to be part of a larger pattern. When tragedy occurs in a neighborhood already accustomed to tragedy, it can become difficult to distinguish the extraordinary from the ordinary. A murder is horrifying. But when murders happen frequently, they risk becoming statistics. That reality haunted Englewood throughout the 1990s. News reports often mentioned crime rates. Politicians discussed crime policies. Television cameras occasionally arrived after particularly shocking incidents. Then they left. The people remained. The fear remained. The grief remained. And beneath it all, a serial killer was learning how to exploit every weakness around him. Andre Crawford was not an outsider entering unfamiliar territory. He belonged to the environment. He knew the streets. He knew the abandoned buildings. He knew the routines of the neighborhood. He knew where vulnerable people gathered. He knew which corners remained active late into the night. He understood the rhythms of Englewood in a way investigators never could. That knowledge gave him an enormous advantage. Imagine a predator moving through terrain he knows intimately while his victims are distracted by the challenges of everyday survival. Imagine police attempting to connect scattered clues while hundreds of unrelated crimes demand their attention. Imagine families reporting missing loved ones in a system already overwhelmed by violence. The result was a perfect storm. A place where danger could remain hidden. A place where patterns could go unnoticed. A place where a serial killer could blend into the background. Yet Englewood was never simply a story of crime. That would be an unfair portrait. The neighborhood was also home to hard-working families, churches, schools, community organizers, and residents determined to create better futures. Children still rode bicycles during summer afternoons. Neighbors still watched out for one another. Local pastors still opened church doors to anyone needing help. Block clubs organized cleanup efforts. Community leaders fought for investment and resources. Life continued despite every obstacle. Hope continued despite every setback. This contrast makes the story even more tragic. Because serial killers do not merely attack individuals. They attack communities. Every murder creates ripples. A daughter disappears. A mother grieves. Friends become fearful. Neighbors become suspicious. Trust erodes. Fear grows. And over time, entire neighborhoods begin carrying emotional wounds. By the mid-1990s, many residents sensed that something unusual was happening. Women were dying. Bodies were being discovered. Rumors circulated through streets and apartment buildings. Conversations took place on front porches and inside corner stores. Some believed a predator was hunting vulnerable women. Others dismissed the idea. After all, violence was already common. Maybe these were unrelated crimes. Maybe they were drug-related incidents. Maybe the similarities were coincidental. No one knew for certain. Even investigators struggled to understand the full picture. Part of the difficulty stemmed from the victims themselves. Many had complicated lives. Some lacked stable housing. Some battled addiction. Some moved frequently. When individuals live on society's margins, reconstructing their final days becomes significantly more difficult. Witnesses may be unreliable. Records may be incomplete. Timelines may contain gaps. For detectives attempting to connect multiple murders, these obstacles can become enormous. Every missing piece of information creates another delay. Every delay gives the killer more time. Meanwhile, Crawford continued moving through the neighborhood. To casual observers, he appeared ordinary. There was nothing about his appearance that immediately suggested the horrors he carried inside. That is often one of the most unsettling realities in cases like this. Popular culture teaches people to expect monsters to look monstrous. Real life rarely works that way. Many serial killers appear completely unremarkable. They shop in grocery stores. They attend community events. They greet neighbors. They stand in line like everyone else. Andre Crawford fit that pattern. The image people would later see in court did not resemble the terrifying figure they imagined while hearing details of his crimes. And perhaps that made him even more frightening. Because evil often wears ordinary faces. As years passed, another factor complicated matters further. A second serial killer was operating in the same general area. His name was Hubert Geralds. The existence of two violent predators hunting vulnerable women created extraordinary confusion. Detectives attempting to solve one case often found evidence that seemed connected to another. Victim profiles overlapped. Locations overlapped. Timelines overlapped. Determining responsibility became increasingly difficult. At one point, investigators even attributed a murder to the wrong killer. Families seeking answers found themselves trapped in a maze of uncertainty. The confusion benefited Crawford. Every unanswered question bought him more time. Every mistaken assumption created another opportunity. Every investigative dead end allowed him to continue. Yet despite these challenges, pressure slowly mounted. The number of victims increased. The similarities became harder to ignore. Law enforcement agencies began recognizing that something larger might be unfolding. Residents became more cautious. Women warned one another. Families worried constantly. A feeling settled over parts of Englewood like a storm cloud refusing to move. No one knew exactly where the danger would appear next. No one knew who would become the next victim. But many people sensed that a predator was out there. Watching. Waiting. Choosing. And somewhere among the residents walking those streets each day was the man responsible. A man who understood the neighborhood's vulnerabilities better than anyone. A man who used trust as a weapon. A man who believed the chaos surrounding him would keep him hidden forever. For now, his secret remained intact. The city continued moving. Winter gave way to spring. Spring gave way to summer. Years passed. Lives changed. Families struggled. Children grew older. And while Englewood fought to survive its many challenges, a darker story was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. A story written in fear, loss, and unanswered questions. A story that would eventually reveal one of Chicago's most disturbing serial murder investigations. But before investigators could identify the killer, before DNA would expose the truth, before courtroom testimony would finally bring justice, there were women whose lives intersected with Andre Crawford's path. Women with dreams. Women with families. Women with histories far richer than the headlines that would later describe them. And to understand what was truly lost during those terrible years, we must first meet the people at the center of this tragedy. When people hear the name Andre Crawford, they usually remember the killer. They remember the headlines. They remember the number of victims. They remember the horrifying details that emerged years later inside a courtroom. What often gets lost is something far more important. The women. The lives that existed long before the crimes. The dreams that came before the fear. The laughter that came before the silence. Because serial murder cases have a way of reducing human beings to statistics. A victim becomes a photograph, shown briefly during a news report. A name appears on a list. A life is compressed into a few sentences. But every victim in this story occupied an entire universe. Each woman had childhood memories. Favorite songs. Private fears. Moments of joy. Moments of regret. People who loved them. People who still miss them. To understand the true weight of what happened in Englewood, we must spend time with those lives. Not only because they deserve to be remembered, but because their stories reveal something larger about the tragedy that unfolded. Many of the women who became Crawford's victims lived difficult lives. Some struggled with addiction. Some survived through prostitution. Some drifted between temporary housing arrangements. Several carried emotional wounds that had accumulated over years of hardship. Yet none of those circumstances defined who they were. The public often sees addiction as a destination. In reality, it is usually part of a much longer story. A story that begins with childhood. With family. With trauma. With loss. With hope. And with countless decisions made under circumstances many people will never experience. Take a moment and imagine Chicago before sunrise. The streets are quiet. Storefronts remain dark. The city has not fully awakened. Inside small apartments scattered across the south side, people begin another day. A mother prepares breakfast. A grandmother watches morning television. Someone gets ready for work. Someone else wonders where they will sleep that night. Among those people were women whose lives would eventually intersect with Andre Crawford. At one point, they were children too. They attended school. They played games. They imagined futures. No little girl grows up dreaming of becoming a victim. No child imagines that her name will one day appear in a homicide file. Yet life does not unfold equally for everyone. By the 1990s, many of these women were fighting battles that remained invisible to outsiders. Some battled addiction every waking hour. Some attempted to rebuild relationships with family members. Some moved between periods of stability and crisis. Some simply tried to survive another week. Survival became its own full-time occupation. A person struggling with addiction often lives in a world governed by immediate needs. Food, shelter, safety. The next dose. Tomorrow becomes difficult to imagine when today already feels overwhelming. Many women in Englewood lived inside that reality. And because they did, society frequently judged them. People crossed streets to avoid them. Dismissed them. Ignored them. Treated them as cautionary tales rather than human beings. Yet family members saw something different. A daughter. A sister. A mother. A friend. Someone worth loving. Someone worth missing. Someone worth finding when they disappeared. Among Crawford's victims were women whose families would spend years searching for answers. Women whose absence left empty chairs at family gatherings. Women whose birthdays became painful reminders of what had been stolen. Women whose photographs remained displayed on dressers long after their deaths. Their names deserve to be spoken. Evandri Harris. Patricia Dunn. Rhonda King. Angel Shateen. Shaquanta Langley. Sonia Brandon. Nicole Townsend. Cheryl Cross. Tommy Dennis. Cheryl Johnson. Constance Bailey. 11 names. 11 human beings. 11 lives interrupted. When investigators later reviewed the case, certain similarities emerged among the victims. Most were black women. Many struggled with substance abuse. Several were involved in street-level prostitution. Many spent time in the same neighborhoods where Crawford operated. These similarities were not coincidences. They were choices. The killer selected victims he believed would be overlooked. Victims whose disappearances might not immediately trigger urgency. Victims he assumed existed beyond society's concern. That assumption says far more about the killer than it does about the women themselves. Because despite their circumstances, these women mattered deeply to people around them. One family member later described the agony of uncertainty that accompanies a disappearance. At first, you tell yourself there must be an explanation. Maybe she is staying with a friend. Maybe she left town unexpectedly. Maybe she simply needs time. Hours become days. Days become weeks. The phone never rings. The door never opens. Hope slowly transforms into dread. And eventually comes the knock. The terrible knock. The moment when police officers arrive. The moment when everything changes. The moment when possibility becomes certainty. Many families experienced exactly that nightmare. Some received devastating news after bodies were discovered. Others endured lengthy periods of uncertainty before learning the truth. None would ever fully recover. Because homicide creates a unique kind of wound. It does not simply take a life. It steals futures. Imagine a family photograph taken years before the murders. Perhaps everyone is smiling. Perhaps children are gathered around relatives during a holiday celebration. No one in that photograph knows what lies ahead. No one can see the tragedy approaching. Yet years later, Family members look back at those pictures differently. Every image becomes precious. Every memory gains new significance. Every conversation becomes irreplaceable. That reality haunted the families connected to this case. The women themselves likely never imagined they were being targeted. Most serial killers rely on fear. Crawford relied on familiarity. Many victims encountered him through environments they already knew. The streets, the neighborhood, the drug scene, the social circles surrounding those worlds. He did not appear as a stranger emerging from darkness. Often, he appeared as someone recognizable. Someone ordinary. Someone unremarkable. That made him extraordinarily dangerous. Trust is one of the most powerful forces in human life. People trust because they must. Without trust, communities cannot function. Friendships cannot exist. Relationships cannot survive. Predators understand this. They exploit trust. Manipulate it. Weaponize it. And Andre Crawford proved disturbingly skilled at doing exactly that. As the years passed, women continued navigating life in Englewood. Many understood danger intimately. They knew violent men existed. They knew certain situations carried risk. Yet no one can remain on constant alert forever. Human beings adapt. Danger becomes normalized. Fear becomes background noise. And eventually, people continue living because they have no alternative. The victims of this case lived within that reality. Some were attempting to overcome addiction. Some were searching for stability. Some were trying to make enough money to survive another day. Their lives were complicated. Messy. Human. Real. That complexity matters, because true crime narratives sometimes create an illusion that victims exist only in relation to the crimes committed against them. Nothing could be further from the truth. The murders represent only the final chapter. The lives came first. Years of experiences came first. Families came first. Dreams came first. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the Crawford case is how many opportunities these women never received. The chance to recover. The chance to reconnect with family. The chance to rebuild. The chance to grow older. The chance to become something new. Every human life contains the possibility of change. People who appear lost sometimes find their way. People battling addiction sometimes achieve recovery. People trapped in darkness sometimes discover hope. The murders eliminated those possibilities forever. And while investigators would eventually focus on forensic evidence, timelines, confessions, and courtroom testimony, the emotional center of the story remained unchanged. 11 women never came home. 11 families lost someone they loved. 11 futures vanished. As fear spread through Englewood, residents gradually became aware that something was wrong. Women were dying under suspicious circumstances. Bodies appeared in abandoned spaces. Rumors circulated through neighborhoods. People whispered about a predator. But rumors rarely provide names. Rumors rarely provide faces. And rumors rarely stop killers. Meanwhile, Crawford continued moving through the same streets as everyone else. Passing neighbors. Entering stores. Walking sidewalks. Existing among the community he was terrorizing. To those who saw him, he was simply another resident navigating life in Englewood. Nobody could see the violence hidden beneath the surface. Nobody could see the memories he carried. Nobody could see the growing trail of destruction left behind him. The victims could not know they were connected. Their families could not know they would one day become part of the same investigation. The city could not yet see the pattern emerging. But somewhere beneath the surface, those connections already existed. The names were accumulating. The grief was accumulating. The unanswered questions were accumulating. And eventually, those questions would demand answers. For now, however, the women remained at the center of the story. Not evidence. Not case numbers. Not statistics. Women. Human beings whose lives mattered. Human beings whose absence would leave permanent scars. Human beings who deserved to be remembered for more than the way they died. Because before they became victims of a serial killer, they were daughters who once held someone's hand while crossing a street. Friends who shared secrets. Children who laughed. Women who hoped for better days. And in the years ahead, as fear tightened its grip on Englewood and a killer grew increasingly confident, those lives would become the reason detectives refused to stop searching. The reason families refused to stop asking questions. The reason justice, however delayed, would eventually arrive. But before justice came terror. Before answers came horror. And before the city learned the identity of the predator hiding among them, the violence itself would reach a level that could no longer be ignored. The nightmare was only beginning. The violence did not arrive all at once. It rarely does. Most serial murder cases begin quietly, hidden beneath ordinary headlines and routine police reports. One victim appears. Then another. Then months pass. Then another body is discovered. Each tragedy seems separate, until someone finally notices a pattern. In Englewood during the 1990s, that pattern emerged slowly, almost invisibly. The neighborhood was already carrying more grief than most communities could bear. Murders were not uncommon. Drug-related violence claimed lives every year. Assaults, robberies, and shootings occupied the attention of police officers struggling to keep up with an overwhelming workload. Against that backdrop, the early crimes connected to Andre Crawford failed to generate the kind of immediate alarm that might have occurred elsewhere. The first victims entered history quietly. No citywide manhunt. No breaking news broadcasts. No emergency press conferences. Just another woman gone. Another family devastated. Another life ending in a place where too many lives were already ending. Yet something different was happening. Something darker. Because the person responsible was not acting out of rage, revenge, or financial gain. He was hunting. The women Crawford targeted often lived in the same fragile world. Many spent time on streets, where drug activity was common. Many knew one another indirectly through overlapping social circles. Some had encountered Crawford before. Others may have recognized him simply as another familiar face in the neighborhood. That familiarity became his greatest weapon. Fear often comes from strangers. Trust comes from recognition. And Crawford understood that distinction. A woman alone at night might avoid an unknown man. She might not avoid someone she had seen before. Someone who appeared ordinary. Someone who seemed harmless. Someone who spoke casually and confidently. The killer used that advantage repeatedly. Years later, investigators would piece together the horrifying scope of what happened between 1993 and 1999. The murders shared recurring elements. Victims were often lured into isolated locations. Abandoned houses. Vacant lots. Buildings forgotten by everyone except those who needed somewhere to hide. These places existed throughout Englewood like scars left behind by decades of economic decline. Many had become invisible to the outside world. A boarded-up structure attracted little attention. A neglected lot raised few questions. For a predator, such places offered privacy. For victims, they became traps. Imagine walking through Englewood after midnight. Streetlights illuminate only portions of the road. Wind whistles through broken windows. Old newspapers tumble across empty sidewalks. The neighborhood feels larger at night, as though darkness stretches every block beyond its normal boundaries. In that environment, entire crimes could unfold unseen. No witnesses. No cameras. No immediate interruption. Just silence. And somewhere within that silence, Crawford committed acts that would later horrify even veteran investigators. The attacks themselves were brutal. Some victims were beaten. Some were strangled. Others suffered stab wounds. Violence varied from case to case, but one element remained constant. The killer sought complete control. Control over movement. Control over fear. Control over life itself. Victims were reduced to objects in the mind of the predator. Humanity disappeared. Empathy disappeared. Only domination remained. This is one of the most disturbing psychological realities found in many serial murder investigations. The killer no longer sees a person. He sees an opportunity. A target. A means of satisfying an internal compulsion. Investigators later described Crawford as a man whose violence escalated over time. The murders became more than acts of aggression. They became part of a ritual. A routine. A cycle that grew increasingly difficult for him to stop. Perhaps the most horrifying detail to emerge from the case involved what happened after death. Most murder investigations focus on the killing itself. The attack. The weapon. The fatal injuries. But Crawford's crimes extended beyond that moment. After murdering some of his victims, he returned. Hours later. Sometimes after leaving the scene entirely. He would come back to the bodies. What investigators eventually uncovered revealed a level of depravity that shocked even experienced homicide detectives. Death was not enough. The violence continued after life had ended. When those details emerged years later, many people struggled to comprehend them. Families of victims endured unimaginable pain hearing what had been done to their loved ones. Detectives who spent careers investigating violent crime described the evidence as deeply disturbing. The crimes violated not only the victims themselves, but also fundamental ideas of human dignity. Yet during the years when the murders were occurring, nobody fully understood the extent of what was happening. Only the killer knew. And he carried that knowledge through the streets of Englewood while appearing completely ordinary. As the victim count grew, fear spread gradually through the community. Conversations began in whispers. Women warned each other. Families became more cautious. Rumors circulated about a dangerous man targeting vulnerable women. No one knew his name. No one knew where he would strike next. But people sensed something was wrong. Residents who spent years navigating neighborhood dangers could often detect shifts in the atmosphere around them. They recognized patterns. They noticed changes. And increasingly, many believed a predator was operating nearby. Still, suspicion alone could not stop the killings. Meanwhile, Crawford became bolder. Confidence often grows when criminals escape consequences. Every successful crime reinforces the illusion of invincibility. Every missed opportunity by investigators strengthens the belief that capture will never come. For years, that belief appeared justified. Bodies continued appearing. Questions continued accumulating. Answers remained elusive. One of the most tragic aspects of the case involved the social circumstances surrounding the victims. Because many struggled with addiction or prostitution, their disappearances sometimes failed to generate immediate urgency. Families cared deeply. Friends cared deeply. But broader public attention often remained limited. Society frequently treats vulnerable people as though their suffering matters less. The Crawford case exposed that uncomfortable reality. Had the victims come from wealthier neighborhoods, media coverage might have looked different. Public pressure might have been stronger. Resources might have arrived sooner. Instead, many of the women lived in circumstances that allowed their deaths to blend into existing narratives about crime and poverty. The killer benefited from that indifference. Not because families stopped searching. Not because investigators stopped caring. But because the system itself struggled to respond with sufficient speed and focus. Every delay created another opportunity. Every unanswered question created another opening. And Crawford exploited those openings relentlessly. Then came one of the most remarkable moments in the entire case. A woman survived. The year was 1997. Unlike the others, she managed to escape death. What she experienced remains one of the most terrifying chapters of the investigation. The attack was savage. Violent. Calculated. At some point during the assault, she realized a horrifying truth. Survival would depend on convincing the attacker she was already dead. It is difficult to imagine the mental strength required in such a moment. The pain. The fear. The uncertainty. Every instinct screaming to move. To run. To fight. Yet she remained still. Pretending. Waiting. Hoping. Trusting that the man standing over her would leave. Eventually, he did. And when he was gone, she survived. Her survival became extraordinary not only because she escaped, but because she carried information. A memory. A face. Details that would later help investigators understand what they were confronting. At the time, however, even that breakthrough was not enough to immediately stop the killer. Crawford remained free. The murders continued. The fear deepened. And perhaps most chilling of all, the man responsible continued interacting with the very community he was terrorizing. Neighbors saw him. Residents spoke with him. Some even viewed him as helpful. The contradiction seems almost impossible to believe. A serial killer participating in community activities. A predator helping distribute information about a murderer. A hunter standing among those searching for the hunter. Yet that was exactly what happened. The duality reveals something profoundly unsettling about human nature. People expect evil to announce itself. To appear obvious. To reveal its presence. Reality is rarely so convenient. Sometimes evil smiles. Sometimes it shakes hands. Sometimes it offers assistance. And sometimes it helps search for its own victims. While Crawford maintained his public appearance, the hidden reality grew darker. Families buried loved ones. Police accumulated evidence. Investigators pursued leads that often led nowhere. The community waited for answers. No one could know how many victims remained undiscovered. No one could know whether the killings would stop. No one could know how much longer the nightmare would continue. Each passing year increased the sense of urgency. Each new murder intensified the pressure. Each grieving family represented another reminder that someone was still out there. Watching. Choosing. Killing. By the late 1990s, the violence had reached a point where coincidence no longer seemed plausible. Patterns were becoming impossible to ignore. Detectives increasingly suspected that multiple cases shared a common offender. Yet proving that suspicion required evidence. Real evidence. Physical evidence. Witness testimony. Connections strong enough to survive scrutiny inside a courtroom. Without those pieces, the killer remained protected by uncertainty. For the families, uncertainty became its own form of suffering. Questions haunted them. What happened? Why? Who was responsible? Could the murders have been prevented? Would justice ever come? Years passed without clear answers. The wounds deepened. The fear persisted. And still the killer walked free. But beneath the surface, something was beginning to change. Advances in forensic science were transforming criminal investigations across America. DNA evidence was becoming increasingly powerful. Cold cases once considered unsolvable were being reopened. Investigators, who lacked answers in previous years, suddenly possessed new tools. The same technological revolution that would expose countless criminals elsewhere was slowly approaching Englewood. And when it arrived, it would begin unraveling the carefully maintained illusion that had protected Andre Crawford for so long. The predator, who believed himself invisible, was about to encounter something he could not manipulate. Something that could not be intimidated. Something that could not forget. The evidence. And once that evidence finally began speaking, the nightmare that had haunted Englewood for 6 years would move toward its inevitable confrontation. The killings had created fear. The fear had created questions. And soon, those questions would finally begin leading investigators toward the man responsible for them all. Death leaves behind evidence. Sometimes it is obvious. A weapon abandoned at the scene. A fingerprint on a door. A witness who saw too much. But more often, especially in serial murder investigations, evidence arrives in fragments. A torn piece of clothing. A footprint softened by rain. A statement that seems insignificant until years later. The challenge facing investigators in Englewood during the 1990s was not a lack of tragedy. It was a lack of clarity. Bodies were being found. Women were dying. Families were grieving. Yet the full shape of the nightmare remained hidden. Each crime scene offered only a glimpse of the truth. And every glimpse raised more questions than answers. The discovery of a homicide scene changes everyone who enters it. Police officers. Paramedics. Detectives. Crime scene technicians. No matter how many violent deaths they have witnessed, there is always a moment when reality settles over the location. Someone lived. Someone struggled. Someone died. And now the silence left behind must somehow tell the story. Many of Andre Crawford's victims were discovered in places already associated with abandonment. Vacant lots. Neglected buildings. Areas where nature and decay slowly reclaimed what people had left behind. To an outsider, such locations might appear empty. But investigators learn quickly that abandoned places are never truly empty. They contain histories, secrets, and sometimes evidence. The first responding officers often encountered scenes that felt eerily isolated. A body lying in tall grass. A victim discovered inside a crumbling structure. A woman left alone in a forgotten corner of the city. The surrounding environment frequently reflected the broader decline affecting parts of Englewood. Broken glass scattered across floors. Graffiti covering walls. Rotting wood. Collapsed ceilings. Cold air moving through shattered windows. These locations created enormous challenges for forensic investigators. Evidence deteriorates quickly in exposed environments. Rain destroys traces. Wind moves objects. Animals disturb remains. Human activity contaminates scenes. Every passing hour makes reconstruction more difficult. And in several of the Crawford murders, investigators arrived after critical time had already passed. Yet even damaged crime scenes speak. A body's position speaks. Injuries speak. Fibers speak. Biological evidence speaks. The challenge lies in learning how to listen. As detectives began examining individual murders, certain details emerged repeatedly. Victims shared similar backgrounds. Many suffered violent physical attacks. Several were discovered within relatively close geographic proximity. Patterns slowly began forming. Not enough for certainty, but enough to create suspicion. Investigators started asking difficult questions. Were these crimes connected? Was a single offender responsible? Or were detectives witnessing unrelated acts of violence occurring within the same troubled neighborhood? At first, answers remained elusive. Every murder investigation begins with possibilities. The victim may have known the killer. The crime may involve drugs, money, jealousy, domestic conflict, gang activity, random violence. Detectives must consider every scenario. In Englewood, there were many possible explanations. Perhaps too many. The neighborhood already experienced significant crime. Distinguishing a serial predator from the background noise of urban violence proved extraordinarily difficult. Each victim came with her own social network, her own history, her own set of relationships. Investigators spent countless hours interviewing acquaintances, relatives, neighbors, and potential witnesses. Many leads appeared promising at first, then collapsed. Witnesses changed stories. Memories faded. Information conflicted. The deeper detectives searched, the more complicated everything became. Meanwhile, the killer remained active. One of the most frustrating realities for investigators involved the condition of many witnesses. Because drugs played a significant role in parts of the victims' social environments, some potential sources of information struggled to provide reliable accounts. People remembered fragments, pieces of conversations, faces glimpsed briefly, vehicles seen from a distance. Rarely enough to build a strong case. The result was an investigation advancing inch by inch while the body count continued growing. Then there were the families. Families who desperately wanted answers. Families who called detectives repeatedly. Families who waited beside telephones hoping for updates. Every murder investigation exists in two worlds simultaneously. There is the official investigation. And there is the private grief. The official investigation focuses on evidence. The private grief focuses on absence. One asks who committed the crime. The other asks why. Neither question is easy to answer. As years passed, detectives accumulated files, photographs, reports, autopsy findings, witness interviews, maps, timelines, entire rooms filled with information. Somewhere within that mountain of material existed the truth. The challenge was finding it. One of the most important developments involved forensic science. By the 1990s, DNA technology was becoming increasingly significant in criminal investigations. Unlike eyewitness testimony, DNA does not forget. Unlike rumors, it does not exaggerate. Unlike confessions, it cannot be influenced by fear or pressure. It simply exists. Waiting. At several crime scenes, investigators recovered biological evidence that would later prove critical. At the time, however, the identity of the contributor remained unknown. Detectives possessed clues but not a name. A fingerprint without a suspect. A voice without a face. A shadow without a body. The evidence waited patiently while investigators continued searching. Complicating matters even further was the presence of another serial killer operating in Chicago during roughly the same period. Hubert Geralds had also targeted women in vulnerable circumstances. The overlap created confusion that investigators would struggle with for years. Some murders appeared similar. Victim profiles sometimes overlapped. Geographic areas overlapped. Timelines overlapped. The possibility of multiple predators hunting within the same community created a nightmare scenario for law enforcement. How do you solve one serial murder investigation when another may be unfolding simultaneously? How do you distinguish patterns when those patterns intersect? At times, detectives found themselves questioning assumptions they previously considered reliable. Cases shifted directions. Theories evolved. What seemed obvious one month became doubtful the next. This confusion provided valuable cover for Crawford. Every uncertainty acted like camouflage. Every investigative disagreement bought him more time. Years later, authorities would determine that at least one murder initially attributed elsewhere actually belonged within Crawford's chain of crimes. The revelation highlighted just how difficult the investigation had become. Yet despite all the obstacles, investigators refused to stop. Patterns continued emerging. Evidence continued accumulating. And perhaps most importantly, fear within the community continued growing. Residents talked. Rumors spread. Stories circulated from block to block. Women became increasingly cautious. Many sensed danger even if they could not identify its source. A serial killer creates more than victims. He creates atmosphere. A feeling. An invisible pressure that settles over entire neighborhoods. People begin checking locks twice. Parents worry longer when children stay out late. Strangers attract suspicion. Normal life changes. Englewood was experiencing exactly that transformation. The fear was real. The danger was real. Only the identity of the predator remained hidden. Then came one of the most significant moments in the entire investigation. The survivor. Unlike the women who never returned, she escaped. Rarely. What she carried from that experience would become invaluable. A witness provides something evidence alone cannot always provide. Human context. Description. Behavior. Memory. Her account painted a terrifying picture of the man who attacked her. She described violence. Control. Cruelty. Most importantly, she survived long enough to tell the story. For detectives, her testimony represented a rare opportunity. Victims of serial murder rarely speak. The dead leave clues. Survivors leave narratives. Her narrative helped investigators understand the threat they were facing. Yet even with her account, the case remained incomplete. The killer still lacked a name. The evidence still lacked a definitive owner. The puzzle remained unfinished. As the 1990s approached their end, detectives found themselves caught between frustration and determination. They knew something larger was happening. They knew women were being targeted. They knew patterns existed. What they lacked was the final connection. The thread tying everything together. The breakthrough that transforms suspicion into certainty. Meanwhile, Andre Crawford continued living among the people searching for him. That fact becomes more unsettling the deeper one examines the case. Imagine attending a community meeting about a serial killer. Imagine discussing fears with neighbors. Imagine accepting help from a volunteer distributing information. Now imagine learning years later that the volunteer was the murderer. The idea sounds almost impossible. Yet reality often exceeds fiction in its capacity for horror. Crawford understood the power of appearances. He understood that people rarely suspect those standing beside them. He understood that confidence can function as camouflage. And for years, that camouflage worked. Detectives chased leads. Families sought answers. The community endured fear. The killer watched it all unfold. Perhaps even enjoying the sense of control. Perhaps believing he had achieved something close to invincibility. But invincibility is usually an illusion. Every serial killer leaves traces. Every offender makes mistakes. Every deception eventually develops cracks. The challenge is finding them before another victim appears. As investigators entered the final years of the decade, those cracks were beginning to form. The evidence preserved from crime scenes still existed. Witness statements still existed. The survivor still existed. And somewhere inside the growing collection of files was the key capable of unlocking everything. The discoveries made at abandoned lots and forgotten buildings had not solved the mystery. Not yet. But they had preserved something essential. The truth. Hidden. Incomplete. Waiting. Waiting for technology to improve. Waiting for the right lead. Waiting for the right detective to notice the right detail. Waiting for the moment when scattered clues would finally align. And when that moment arrived, the investigation, that had spent years wandering through darkness, would suddenly begin moving toward the man responsible for 11 deaths. The crime scenes had spoken. The evidence had endured. And soon, after years of silence, it would finally reveal the name investigators had been searching for all along. By the end of the 1990s, the investigation had become a maze. Detectives stood in the center of it, surrounded by photographs, witness statements, forensic reports, maps, timelines, and unanswered questions. Every wall seemed covered with names. Every folder contained another tragedy. Every lead promised answers before dissolving into uncertainty. Somewhere among the evidence was the identity of a serial killer. The problem was finding him before he claimed another victim. One of the most frustrating aspects of the Crawford investigation was that investigators were not chasing a ghost. They were chasing a man who existed within the community. A man people had seen. A man people knew. A man who moved openly through Englewood. Yet knowing that a killer exists and proving who he is are two very different things. Law enforcement often describes homicide investigations as giant puzzles assembled without knowing whether all the pieces are even present. In serial murder cases, that challenge becomes exponentially more difficult. Every victim represents a separate crime scene. A separate timeline. A separate social circle. A separate collection of evidence. Detectives must somehow connect all of those pieces while avoiding assumptions that could derail the investigation. In Englewood, the puzzle seemed determined to resist every attempt at completion. 1 week investigators focused on a possible suspect. The next week that suspect had an alibi. One witness claimed certainty. Another contradicted the account. One piece of evidence pointed in a promising direction. Another raised entirely new questions. The deeper detectives looked, the more complicated everything became. Meanwhile, fear continued spreading through the neighborhood. People talked. Rumors evolved. Stories traveled from one block to another. Residents developed their own theories about who might be responsible. Some believed the killer was an outsider entering the neighborhood at night. Others believed he lived nearby. Some suspected drug dealers. Others suspected violent clients who targeted women involved in prostitution. The theories multiplied because certainty remained absent. Human beings naturally seek explanations when confronted with fear. In the absence of facts, imagination fills the gaps. Unfortunately, imagination rarely solves murder cases. Evidence does. And evidence was proving difficult to organize into a coherent narrative. Adding to the confusion was the existence of another predator. Hubert Geralds had already emerged as a major focus for investigators examining murders involving vulnerable women in Chicago. His crimes shared enough similarities with some of the cases connected to Crawford that detectives found themselves navigating extraordinarily dangerous territory. What if they were looking for one killer when there were actually two? What if evidence from different cases had become unintentionally intertwined? What if assumptions made years earlier were wrong? These questions haunted investigators. At times, the overlap between the two cases created almost impossible challenges. Victims came from similar backgrounds. Geographic areas overlapped. Methods of attack sometimes appeared comparable. For detectives trying to establish clear patterns, the similarities created confusion that consumed valuable time. Serial murder investigations depend heavily on recognizing behavioral signatures. But what happens when two violent offenders operate within the same environment? Patterns become blurred. Certainty becomes elusive. And mistakes become more likely. Years later, authorities would determine that one homicide previously associated with Geralds actually belonged to Crawford. The revelation demonstrated just how tangled the investigation had become. Families searching for answers often found themselves trapped inside that confusion. Imagine losing someone you love. Imagine waiting years for answers. Then imagine learning that even investigators remain uncertain about who committed the crime. The emotional toll becomes almost impossible to measure. Many relatives continued contacting police, hoping for updates. Hoping for progress. Hoping for justice. Every phone call represented a painful reminder that someone was missing. Someone had been taken. Someone mattered. The investigation moved forward, but often at a painfully slow pace. Detectives interviewed countless individuals connected to the victims. Drug users. Sex workers. Neighbors. Former partners. Friends. Acquaintances. People who had seen something. People who thought they had seen something. People who wanted attention. People who feared retaliation. Each interview generated more information. And more uncertainty. One witness claimed a victim entered a vehicle before disappearing. Another remembered seeing her walking alone. Someone described an argument. Someone else denied it ever happened. Sorting truth from rumor became an exhausting process. Yet detectives persisted. Because beneath the contradictions, certain themes continued emerging. The victims shared too many similarities. The locations shared too many similarities. The circumstances shared too many similarities. Something connected these cases. The challenge was proving it. Then there was the survivor. Her existence represented one of the most significant pieces of the entire investigation. Unlike the murder victims, she could speak. She could describe. She could remember. Her testimony provided detectives with something they desperately needed. A living connection to the predator. Investigators spent countless hours reviewing every detail she could recall. What did he look like? How did he speak? What words did he use? What behavior stood out? Even the smallest observation might prove important. Serial killers often leave impressions that seem insignificant at first, but become critical later. A phrase. A habit. A mannerism. A specific way of moving. The survivor's account offered a glimpse into the mind behind the attacks. Not enough to identify him immediately, but enough to strengthen the growing belief that a single offender was responsible. Still, a description alone could not solve the case. Detectives needed more. They needed evidence that could survive scrutiny in court. Evidence that could connect a suspect directly to the murders. And that evidence remained frustratingly out of reach. At least for the moment. The late 1990s marked a period of enormous change in criminal investigations across America. DNA technology was rapidly transforming law enforcement. Cases once considered impossible suddenly became solvable. Evidence stored for years acquired new value. Crime scene samples that previously generated few answers could now reveal astonishing information. For investigators working the Crawford murders, these developments offered hope. Some crime scenes had yielded biological evidence. The problem was not whether evidence existed. The problem was identifying its source. Somewhere, there was a person whose DNA matched the samples. Somewhere, there was a name attached to the evidence. Investigators simply did not know it yet. As technology improved, detectives began re-examining older assumptions. Cold evidence became warm again. Dormant leads regained importance. Questions that once seemed unanswerable suddenly appeared solvable. The investigation slowly shifted. Not dramatically. Not overnight. But enough to create momentum. Momentum matters in serial murder investigations. Without it, cases can stagnate. With it, seemingly unrelated clues begin connecting. During this period, detectives also became increasingly aware of a disturbing possibility. The killer might be far closer to the investigation than anyone realized. Many serial offenders follow media coverage of their crimes. Some attend vigils. Some revisit crime scenes. Some insert themselves into investigations. They crave proximity to the fear they create. They enjoy watching others search for answers. And occasionally, they become bold enough to participate directly. Andre Crawford would eventually prove to be exactly that type of offender. Long before his arrest, he appeared in places no one expected. Community gatherings. Neighborhood activities. Conversations about the murders. At times, he reportedly assisted efforts aimed at warning residents about the danger stalking Englewood. The irony is almost unbearable. A serial killer helping distribute warnings about a serial killer. A predator standing among frightened residents. A murderer discussing murders he himself committed. To investigators years later, these details revealed extraordinary arrogance. But at the time, nobody knew. Nobody looked at him and saw 11 murders. Nobody looked at him and saw the fear gripping the neighborhood. They saw another resident. Another face. Another member of the community. That invisibility became one of his greatest protections. Yet every protection eventually weakens. Every deception eventually develops flaws. And as the decade approached its end, cracks were beginning to appear. The evidence collected from crime scenes still existed. The survivors' testimony still existed. The patterns still existed. Most importantly, detectives had not stopped searching. Many investigations fail because resources disappear. Public attention fades. Motivation declines. That did not happen here. The families remained determined. The detectives remained determined. The community remained determined. Somewhere out there was a man responsible for years of terror. And increasingly, investigators believed they were getting closer. The question was how close. Unknown to the killer, events were already moving toward a decisive turning point. A single tip. A single conversation. A single piece of information can change everything in a criminal investigation. Cases that remain unsolved for years sometimes break open in a matter of days once the right lead arrives. That reality gives detectives hope. No matter how difficult a case becomes, the next phone call might contain the answer. The next witness might provide the missing piece. The next lead might reveal the truth. As the 1990s came to a close, that possibility was becoming increasingly real. The investigation had endured confusion, false starts, overlapping suspects, contradictory statements, and years of frustration. Yet despite every obstacle, the search continued. And somewhere in Englewood, a man who believed himself untouchable was moving closer to the moment that would destroy the illusion he had spent years constructing. The killer still felt invisible. Still felt safe. Still believed he controlled the narrative. But evidence has a strange way of waiting patiently. Waiting until the right moment. Waiting until the right person notices the right connection. Waiting until the truth can no longer remain hidden. That moment was approaching. And when it arrived, the investigation would finally shift from uncertainty to certainty, from suspicion to proof, and from a faceless predator to a name that would soon become infamous throughout Chicago. Andre Crawford had spent years escaping justice. Now justice was beginning to move toward him. For 6 years, Andre Crawford had lived inside a dangerous illusion. The illusion was not that he had committed the murders. He knew exactly what he had done. The illusion was that he would never be caught. Every successful attack reinforced that belief. Every unsolved case strengthened it. Every year that passed without an arrest convinced him that he had somehow mastered the system. Like many serial killers before him, Crawford began confusing luck with intelligence. He mistook investigative obstacles for personal superiority. He mistook delayed justice for permanent freedom. And that mistake would ultimately destroy him. By the end of the 1990s, detectives investigating the murders had accumulated an enormous amount of information. The files represented years of work, countless interviews, forensic examinations, crime scene analyses, and frustrating dead ends. The investigation had survived confusion involving multiple suspects, overlapping serial murder cases, and the immense challenge of reconstructing crimes committed against some of the most vulnerable members of society. But the truth was still there. Hidden. Waiting. The breakthrough did not arrive with dramatic fanfare. It did not begin with a televised announcement. It did not begin with flashing police lights. Like many major developments in criminal investigations, it began quietly. A tip. A name. A possibility. On January 28, 2000, investigators received information pointing toward Andre Crawford. At first glance, there was nothing magical about the lead itself. Detectives receive tips constantly. Most go nowhere. Some contain partial truths mixed with rumors. Others are completely false. But experienced investigators learn something important over time. Every major case eventually turns on a detail that once seemed ordinary. This tip was different, because it pointed toward a man whose life intersected with the environment surrounding many of the victims. Suddenly detectives had something concrete. Not certainty. Not proof. But direction. And direction is priceless in a long-running investigation. For years, investigators had been looking through a fog. Now they could finally see a shape forming inside it. The name Andre Crawford entered the spotlight. Detectives immediately began examining everything they could find. His history. His connections. His movements. His relationships. His possible links to the victims. The deeper they looked, the more interested they became. Patterns that once appeared disconnected began aligning. Questions that previously lacked answers suddenly seemed more manageable. Most importantly, investigators recognized an opportunity that had not existed before. They could compare Crawford directly against the forensic evidence preserved from the crime scenes. The evidence had been waiting for years. Now it finally had someone to confront. For detectives, this stage of an investigation can feel both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because a suspect has emerged. Terrifying because expectations can cloud judgment. Good investigators know they must remain cautious. A suspect is not a killer. Suspicion is not proof. Every assumption must be tested. Every theory must be challenged. Otherwise, innocent people can become trapped by investigative momentum. So detectives moved carefully, methodically, patiently. And then science entered the story. DNA evidence had already transformed criminal investigations throughout America. Cases once considered unsolvable suddenly yielded answers. Offenders who believed themselves safe discovered that biological traces left years earlier could still expose them. Unlike human memory, DNA does not deteriorate with fear. It does not become confused. It does not change its story. It simply exists. And in the Crawford investigation, it was about to speak loudly. Investigators compared DNA evidence recovered from multiple crime scenes against Crawford's sample. The results were devastating. One match might be explained. Two matches become difficult to dismiss. Multiple matches across numerous investigations become nearly impossible to escape. The evidence pointed in one direction. Toward Andre Crawford. Years of uncertainty suddenly began collapsing into certainty. The invisible predator was becoming visible. The man who had hidden behind chaos and confusion was losing his cover. Detectives, who had spent years searching, finally found themselves standing near the truth. The emotional impact of such moments is difficult to describe. Homicide investigators often carry cases with them for years. Victims become more than files. Families become more than names in reports. Unsolved murders create a sense of unfinished responsibility. When breakthroughs arrive, they bring relief. But they also bring anger. Because every answer raises another question. If this is the killer, why did it take so long? How many deaths might have been prevented? How many opportunities were missed? Those questions haunted the Crawford investigation. Yet there was little time to dwell on them. The case was moving quickly now. Evidence continued accumulating. Connections strengthened. Pressure increased. And eventually investigators brought Crawford in for questioning. Interrogation rooms are rarely as dramatic as movies portray them. Most are small. Plain. Functional. Fluorescent lights. Simple furniture. Few distractions. The real drama comes from what happens inside. Two sides enter the room. One searching for truth. The other deciding whether to reveal it. When detectives sat across from Andre Crawford, they were no longer dealing with rumors. They were confronting a man increasingly surrounded by evidence. The psychological balance had shifted. For years, Crawford held the advantage. He knew the truth while investigators searched for it. Now investigators possessed pieces of the truth themselves. Enough pieces to challenge him. Enough pieces to corner him. Enough pieces to force difficult choices. What happened next shocked many observers. Rather than maintaining complete denial, Crawford began confessing. Not to one crime. Not to two. But to a horrifying series of crimes spanning years. The admissions poured out. Murder after murder. Victim after victim. Details that investigators already suspected. Details only the killer could know. The scale of the nightmare finally became visible. For years, families had searched for answers. Now answers were arriving. But answers are not always comforting. Sometimes they deepen the horror. Detectives listening to Crawford describe his actions encountered precisely that experience. The confessions revealed not merely violence, but repetition. Pattern. Compulsion. The murders were not isolated acts. They formed a sequence. A cycle. A dark routine repeated again and again across 6 years. Perhaps most disturbing was Crawford's apparent lack of genuine remorse. Investigators later described a man who seemed emotionally detached from the suffering he had caused. The grief of families. The terror of victims. The devastation left behind. None appeared to affect him in the way most people would expect. That emotional emptiness often appears in discussions involving serial offenders. Not always. But frequently enough to disturb even experienced professionals. While families carried wounds for years, the killer discussed murders with unsettling calmness. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Then came another chilling revelation. According to investigators, Crawford described killing as something that had become addictive. The statement horrified those who heard it. Not because addiction excuses behavior. Far from it. But because the word revealed how the killer viewed his own actions. Not as tragedies. Not as moral catastrophes. But as urges. Compulsions. Experiences he increasingly struggled to resist. The implications were terrifying. If he had not been stopped, how many more victims might have followed? How many additional years could the murders have continued? Nobody could answer those questions. But many investigators believed the danger remained very real. Meanwhile, news of the arrest spread through Chicago. Families reacted with complex emotions. Relief. Grief. Anger. Disbelief. Some had waited years for answers. Now those answers stood before them in human form. A man. Not a monster from imagination. Not a faceless shadow. A real person. A neighbor. A member of the community. The reality felt almost impossible to process. Perhaps the most unsettling detail emerged when the public learned that Crawford had participated in community efforts related to the search for the killer. The revelation stunned residents. People remembered seeing him. Talking with him. Trusting him. The idea that the predator had been standing among them all along felt like a betrayal of reality itself. It shattered assumptions about what evil should look like. For years, residents imagined a hidden threat lurking somewhere beyond their view. Instead, the threat had often been directly in front of them. Smiling. Talking. Listening. Watching. That realization transformed fear into something even more disturbing. Recognition. The breakthrough had finally arrived. The evidence had spoken. The confessions had followed. The years of uncertainty were ending. Yet another challenge remained. Arresting a serial killer and convicting one are very different things. Detectives had solved the mystery. Now prosecutors would need to prove it. Every confession would face scrutiny. Every piece of evidence would face examination. Every detail would be challenged inside a courtroom. The journey toward justice was far from over. But the turning point had occurred. The invisible man was invisible no longer. The predator, who believed himself untouchable, had been identified. The killer, who spent 6 years hiding behind the chaos of Englewood, now sat in custody. And for the first time since the murders began, the balance of power had completely changed. Andre Crawford no longer controlled the narrative. The evidence did. The victims did. The truth did. And that truth was about to follow him into court, where years of fear, grief, and unanswered questions would finally confront the man responsible for one of the darkest serial murder cases in Chicago history. Justice is often imagined as a single moment. A verdict. A sentence. The sound of a judge's gavel striking wood. But for the families connected to the Andre Crawford case, justice was a long and exhausting road measured not in days or weeks, but in years. When Crawford was arrested in January 2000, many believed the legal process would move quickly. After all, investigators had obtained confessions. DNA evidence connected him to multiple victims. A surviving witness had identified the man who nearly killed her. To outside observers, the case appeared overwhelming. Yet criminal prosecutions, particularly those involving multiple murders, rarely move with speed. The Crawford case became trapped inside a maze of legal procedures, evidentiary reviews, motions, appeals, and pretrial challenges. Year after year passed, while attorneys argued over technical issues and courtroom schedules shifted repeatedly. For the families, each delay felt like reopening a wound. They had already spent years waiting for answers. Now they found themselves waiting for justice. Months became years. Years became nearly a decade. Meanwhile, Crawford sat in custody. The women he murdered remained gone. And the people who loved them continued living with grief. Some family members attended hearings whenever possible. Others found the process emotionally overwhelming. Each appearance forced them to revisit details they desperately wished they could forget. The photographs. The autopsy reports. The testimony. The descriptions of violence. Nothing about the process was easy. Yet many remained determined to see it through. Because the courtroom represented something larger than punishment. It represented acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that these women mattered. Acknowledgement that their lives had value. Acknowledgement that what happened to them would not be forgotten. As the years passed, prosecutors continued preparing one of the most significant serial murder cases in modern Chicago history. The scale of the investigation was enormous. 11 murder victims. Multiple crime scenes. Years of forensic evidence. Hundreds of witnesses. Thousands of pages of reports. Every detail had to be organized. Every piece of evidence had to be examined. Every argument had to withstand scrutiny. The burden facing prosecutors was substantial. Even when a confession exists, the government must still prove its case. Confessions can be challenged. Statements can be disputed. Defense attorneys can question procedures. Evidence must speak for itself. In the Crawford case, prosecutors intended to present a mountain of evidence capable of doing exactly that. By the time the trial finally approached in 2009, nearly 10 years had passed since Crawford's arrest. The delay made the moment feel surreal. Some family members had aged significantly during the wait. Children had become adults. Parents had grown older. Lives had continued moving forward despite the absence that remained at the center of everything. The victims could not return. But perhaps the truth could finally be heard. When proceedings began, the atmosphere inside the courtroom carried enormous emotional weight. Serial murder trials are unlike ordinary criminal cases. The crimes themselves are larger. The evidence is larger. The grief is larger. Everyone entering the courtroom understood they were witnessing the final chapter of a story that had haunted Chicago for years. Reporters filled seats. Attorneys organized documents. Court personnel prepared exhibits. Family members sat quietly, waiting. And at the center of it all sat Andre Crawford. The man who had once moved through Englewood unnoticed. The man who had hidden among residents while fear spread through the neighborhood. The man who believed he would never be caught. Now he faced the consequences of everything that followed. Prosecutors began constructing the case piece by piece. Not through emotion. Not through speculation. But through evidence. The jury heard about the victims. They heard about the investigation. They learned how detectives gradually connected murders that initially appeared unrelated. The prosecution carefully built a timeline stretching across years. A timeline filled with disappearances, discoveries, and growing suspicion. Then came the forensic evidence. DNA had transformed the investigation, and it became one of the most powerful weapons inside the courtroom. Scientific evidence carries a unique authority. Witnesses can forget. Memories can change. Rumors can spread. DNA remains consistent. Jurors listened as experts explained the connections between Crawford and the victims. The evidence linked him directly to crimes that had remained unsolved for years. The scientific findings supported what investigators had suspected. The predator responsible for the murders was sitting only a few feet away. Perhaps even more devastating was the introduction of Crawford's own words. Jurors viewed recordings and heard details from his confessions. The impact was profound. There is something uniquely disturbing about hearing a killer describe his own actions. The distance between suspicion and certainty disappears. The crimes become real in a different way. No longer theoretical. No longer abstract. Real. Permanent. Horrifying. The confessions revealed a pattern of violence that stretched across 6 years. Victim after victim. Attack after attack. A sequence of crimes that exposed the full scale of the devastation inflicted upon Englewood. For family members sitting in the courtroom, those moments were excruciating. Many already knew the broad details. Yet hearing them repeated in an official setting created fresh pain. Some cried. Some stared silently ahead. Some struggled simply to remain in their seats. Every description reminded them of what had been taken. Every piece of evidence represented a life that could never be restored. Then came one of the most powerful moments of the trial. The survivor took the stand. Years earlier, she had experienced what many believed should have been a fatal attack. She had endured unimaginable violence. She had survived by pretending to be dead. Now she faced the man responsible. Courtrooms often appear calm from the outside. But beneath that calm surface, powerful emotional currents exist. When survivors testify, those currents become impossible to ignore. Jurors listened as she described the attack. The fear. The brutality. The desperate effort to stay alive. Her testimony transformed the case from a collection of reports into something deeply human. This was not merely a discussion of evidence. This was a person who had lived through the nightmare. A person who carried memories no one should ever have to carry. A person whose survival helped expose a serial killer. Her courage strengthened the prosecution's case considerably. More importantly, it provided a voice for women who could no longer speak for themselves. The defense attempted to challenge aspects of the evidence, as defense attorneys are obligated to do. They scrutinized procedures, questioned interpretations, examined details. That process is a fundamental part of the justice system. The burden rests with prosecutors to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Yet as the trial continued, the weight of evidence remained overwhelming. DNA, confessions, witness testimony, the survivor's account. The combined force of those elements proved extraordinarily difficult to overcome. Day after day, jurors absorbed information, photographs, reports, expert testimony, descriptions of crime scenes, descriptions of victims, descriptions of investigations that had consumed years of effort. Gradually, a complete picture emerged. Not a picture of isolated incidents. Not a picture of coincidence. A picture of a serial predator systematically targeting vulnerable women across Englewood. Outside the courtroom, the case reignited conversations throughout Chicago. Many residents remembered the fear that had gripped the neighborhood during the 1990s. Many remembered the women whose deaths initially received limited attention. Many remembered how long it took for the pattern to become fully recognized. The trial forced the city to confront uncomfortable questions. Why had the murders continued for so long? Could more have been done earlier? Did the victims receive the attention they deserved? These questions extended beyond Andre Crawford himself. They touched on broader issues involving poverty, addiction, race, and vulnerability. The victims had often existed at the margins of society. Yet the trial made something unmistakably clear. Their lives mattered. Their stories mattered. And their deaths demanded accountability. Finally, after years of waiting, the case approached its conclusion. The jury retired to deliberate. For families, those hours felt endless. The evidence had been presented. The testimony had been heard. Nothing more remained to be said. All that remained was a decision. Then the jury returned. The courtroom grew still. Every eye focused forward. These moments carry immense weight, because they represent the point where uncertainty ends. The truth, at least in legal terms, is about to be declared. On December 10, 2009,